Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Monday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. Sitting here reading an absolutely intriguing and very helpful article by Crispin H.T. Fletcher Lewis. She is a highly respected biblical scholar. The article is entitled, Jesus, the Temple, and the Dissolution of Heaven and Earth. And she postulates, as full preterists have been doing for years, by the way, that when Jesus predicted, quote, the destruction of heaven and earth, unquote, of Matthew 24:35, that he was actually talking about the destruction of the temple, which the Jews referred to as heaven and earth. Now, as I said, I've been saying this, William Bell's been saying this, many preterists have been saying this for years and years. And so this is not, insofar as preterists are concerned, this is not new territory, but what it is, quote, scholarly, unquote, accreditation and giving credence to the view that we've been espousing for years. So it's a fascinating, very helpful, and obviously a very scholarly presentation of the idea that in the Jewish mindset, heaven and earth was the temple. Now, she's not suggesting, preterists have never suggested, that the Bible never refers to the literal physical heaven and earth. It's not the argument. The argument is that in the context, for instance, in Matthew 5:17 and 18, in the context of Matthew chapter 24, that the reference to heaven and earth is in fact reference to the temple. Now, I want to let you know, tomorrow morning I'm going to introduce a really fantastic February 2021 three-book special that's going to save you some really significant money. So you want to be watching in the morning. I've got the books laid out right here on my desk. Won't tell you what they are at this point, but be watching for it because you're going to love this month's special. One free book, 2-book order, saving you some real serious money. All right, we are examining the Olivet Discourse. Is it a divided discussion between the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70, referred to as the coming of the Son of Man on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, versus, or in addition to, a description and discussion of the coming of the Lord at the end of the current Christian age? Now, we've been focused on Matthew 25, 1 to 13, because it is a prediction, it was a prediction, of the coming of the Son of Man in the kingdom for the wedding. And I've been sharing with you a great number, both Old Testament prophecies, and we're not through with that, of the coming of the Lord for the wedding, and with different terminology. For instance, we've been focused last couple of weeks on Isaiah chapter 65. The new creation that would, technically speaking, flow from the wedding. Because you see, the wedding would be the end of the old covenant itself. It would be the end of the old covenant creation and the beginning, the full bloom. By the way, just this last week, I had some people write and say, Don Preston says, and William Bell says, the new covenant didn't even begin until AD 70. Well, in the first place, you can't find that in any of our writings. You can't find that in any of our speeches. So when somebody jumps up and says, Bell and Preston deny that the new covenant even existed before AD 70, they are not telling the truth. Pure and simple, they're either ignorant of what we actually teach or, as in the case of some of them, they're purposely, willfully misrepresenting what we say. The new covenant was established by the blood of Christ, Galatians 3:15. He instituted it, as it were, Matthew 26, this is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for you for the remission of sin. Well, there it is. He's offering the beginning of the new covenant. But that new covenant was not fully set in place, wasn't even fully revealed until that 40-year transitional period. So, I gotta move on. I just wanted to make the correction in case you've read some people or heard some people say, Bell and Preston deny that the new covenant even existed until AD 70. Once again, that's a blatant misrepresentation of our position. Now, the coming of the Lord for the wedding of Matthew chapter 25 is the time of the consummation of that new covenant. And that wedding would be the creation of this new world, this new heaven, and this new earth, which, by the way, Crispin Fletcher Lewis touches on this in this very scholarly article. You might avail yourself of that and get a copy of it. So, Isaiah chapter 65 predicts, and it is the consummate, it's the foundational Old Testament prophecy of the new creation. Since it is the prophecy of the new creation, it's the prophecy of the wedding. And it is the prophecy, by the way, as virtually all scholars agree, verse 13 and following, of the Messianic wedding banquet. Now, last Thursday, I shared with you this prelude to the wedding. The prelude to the wedding is found in Isaiah chapter 65, 15 and following. You, the Lord is speaking to Old Covenant Israel, you shall leave your name as a curse to my chosen, for the Lord God will slay you and call his people, his servants, by another name. In verses 13 to 14, the Lord speaks of this messianic wedding banquet. My servants shall eat, you shall be hungry. My servants shall thirst, you shall be thirsty. My servants shall sing for joy of heart, you shall wail for sorrow of spirit. See, this is the messianic wedding banquet. Some were going to be cast out. Some were not going to enjoy it as was intended. Why? Well, because they were foolish. There's 5 wise, 5 foolish virgins, as in Matthew 25. Now, I want you to notice then that in verse 19, well, let's look at verse 17. And I want you to notice the connective particle for. In other words, that connective particle connects what he is about to say with what he has just said. What has he just said? There's going to be the Messianic wedding banquet. Marvelous, wonderful, joyous. Oh, but there's also going to be bad news. It's good news, bad news. By the way, this joins judgment and salvation together. Far too often people try to dichotomize them and say, well, this passage is talking about judgment, so it's a different time from this passage, which talks about salvation. No. That's an improper hermeneutic. So here we have judgment and salvation joined in the same passage. My servant shall eat, you shall be hungry. The Lord God will slay you for what he is about to say is joined to the previous discussion of the destruction of Old Covenant Israel and the wedding banquet. For, behold, I create new heavens and new earth, and the former shall not be remembered or come to mind. I've just got to throw this in there very, very quickly. I had some people who constantly try to argue against covenant eschatology argue just this past week. Well, you see, Isaiah chapter 65, now that's talking about the current Messianic age. It's not talking about what 2 Peter's talking about. Really? Really? Peter said he was looking for the new heaven and new earth foretold by the Old Testament prophets. What Old Testament prophet foretold the coming of the new heaven and new earth? Oh, that would be Isaiah 65, 66. And so here this anti-preterist goes to the foundational Old Testament prophecy of the new heaven and new earth that Peter cites in 2 Peter 3, and he says, well, you see, Isaiah 65 is not really what Peter's talking about after all. Peter just lied. Peter was mistaken. Or maybe Peter misapplied the text. I don't know what his position is. He never explains it in that detail. Here's the point. When he applies Isaiah 65 and says that the new heaven and new earth is the current Messianic age, you know what he's arguing? He is arguing that heaven and earth was destroyed in the first century. And by the way, since this particular individual says that the Messianic age began with the birth of Jesus, that means that the Old Covenant, heaven and earth of Old Covenant Israel, passed away at the birth of Jesus. I'm sorry. I mean no disrespect. But this is what you call an argumentum ad desperatum. You know, the anti-preterists are just literally making stuff up as they go along. And what they're making up doesn't even make good nonsense. Now, out of time for this morning, but I want you to consider the following question. Does your traditional eschatology, does your traditional futurist eschatology provide for and teach, advocate, and affirm that for the new heaven and the new earth to come, Old Covenant Israel had to be destroyed? Does your traditional futurist eschatology say that the new heaven and a new earth comes when Old Covenant Israel is destroyed? Well, if your traditional eschatology, your traditional futurist eschatology, does not provide for and teach that the new creation arrives at the destruction of Old Covenant Israel, then your eschatology differs from that of Isaiah 65. And it differs from what the Bible has to say. Hey, we're out of time. Do not forget, you got to watch tomorrow for the introduction of our February 2021, U.S. orders only, fantastic book special. I'll see you on the flip side.